Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Lawn Care CEO podcast. My name is Dan Ralphs. I'm here with the CEO of the Lawn Care CEO, Aaron Suttonfield. I'm super excited to be with you today. I have a little bit of a lawn care confession to make, Aaron, and I'm going to treat you like my lawn care priest here to start off the day, and I'm going to do a little confessional to the lawn care. The lawn care gods here a little, not to be sacrilegious. I live in Arizona, and so we don't do a lot of grass. We do grass, but not a lot of grass here. Probably somebody from Arizona who does mowing is like, we do plenty of grass. But I just this last week got rid of the last scrap of grass on my property. I feel like I have to confess this to the lawn care community that I honestly have no lawn on my property here in Arizona. And I just need you to absolve me of that sin. Of
The lawn care CEO has no grass.
Has no lawn.
The emperor, is that, wasn't there a whole...
the emperor has no clothes. I don't think that was the same moral, but...
Okay. I haven't seen it, read the book, or watched the movie, but...
That's the one. That's that one where everyone's afraid to tell. It's a good principle, by the way. It's the one where everyone's afraid to tell the boss that he's wrong.
Ooh.
And so the king shows up. If you guys not know this, the king shows up, and this kind of funny tailor is like, "Hey, I'm going to give you these new clothes, and they're super fancy," and just has no clothes at all. But no one in the kingdom is willing to say, Hey, king, you're not wearing any clothes, man. Until a little kid, right, is like, excuse me, you're naked. And then it's like the principle is, hey, we got to be willing to tell people when something's wrong.
Are you surrounded? Are you a CEO or leader who's surrounded by people who are afraid to tell you the truth?
Tell you the truth, yeah, and that's the one. But this is the lawn care owner with no lawn care CEO, business owner,
no grass,
with no lawn. The reason I bring it up is this. It's almost like a reminder of what this podcast is really about, right? Like, this isn't a podcast where you're going to find us talking about the difference between, fescue and Bermuda. We're not going to talk about what equipment you should be using to edge your lawns. Like what this is about how to be a great CEO of your business, how to run your business effectively. I had somebody on a call today who I'm coaching. He said what I told him. I said that was the sexiest thing you've ever said to me. And Aaron, tell me if you agree that this is a sexy statement for a CEO to make. He said, Dan, I'm not going to that conference that you were talking about. And the reason I'm not going to the conference is because they're just going to talk about a lot about the industry and how to do the work. And he's like, I'm just realizing more and more, it's not about how the lessons I need to learn aren't about how to do the work. I need to learn how to be a better business owner and how to better run the business. And I was like, oh, that's so sexy. When you're able to come to the realization that this is more about how to run a great business, and the ones who win are the ones who get good at the game of business. Number one, and number two, get good at being a great lawn care expert and technician. Like, you have made a huge leap forward in that realization. And I was like, you should tell your wife that before you go to bed tonight, and you'll have a great night, because that was the sexiest thing I've heard in a long time.
I know who you're talking about, and that makes me proud.
Yeah, right.
And happy for him. Yeah,
that was a big breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And so today we're picking up where we left off of our podcast number 1, part 1, which was why you never make money in your landscaping or lawn care business. And we talked last time about there are kind of these two pieces. So if you haven't heard part 1, actually, I don't know the sequence really matters, but you want to listen to the other one, because there are two parts. Part 1 is, hey, there are two ways to make profit. I either increase how much I charge, or I decrease how much it costs me to deliver. And today we're going to be talking about this second part, which is that I decrease the cost to deliver the product that I'm delivering. And between the two, hopefully, we get to the point where we're making money as a lawn care business. But the reason typically that people don't is because either they're not charging enough, or they're paying out way too much to deliver the product that they're serving. And so we're going to talk about kind of dig into that idea of what can we do on the other side, on the side of making ourselves more efficient, of paying out less while getting more, right? While producing the same amount or more, and how we might think about that as a CEO or leader when it comes to making sure our price is right, that we're producing the work in a good way, in an efficient way, and we're not overspending on our overhead or our cost of goods. So our favorite phrase here is cost of goods sold. We love that number. We love talking about what that is, what that means. And because it is kind of at the foundation of everything, right, Aaron? So like for you, like why, you're the one who really taught me this in the first place, but like why is cost of goods or its opposite, which is net profit? Why do those two really matter to you?
Gross profit, right?
Gross profit. I said net.
Yeah.
Gross profit.
I mean, essentially, the best way I would describe it, Dan, is when we're evaluating a business, right? So we work with, we talk to hundreds of businesses. We work with quite a few. And when I have a conversation with a new business, I want to first trust their numbers are good. Once I know I can trust their numbers are good and they've got it aligned in the way we want it, right? Then I can say, what's your cost of goods as a percentage of revenue? And that number translates across the entire industry, right? From California to, North Carolina and in between, right? I can pretty much go, oh, okay, your cost of goods as a percentage of revenue is 35%. Tell me what your services are. Oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Your lawn fertilization and your landscape lighting and irrigation or something like that, right? And so I can tell that company compares, that's apples to apples comparison to me. When we get past the cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue, when I get into overhead, it's not apples to apples, right? It's all over the board, right? And I can give you a couple examples. Last year in my personal company, we showed almost no profit last year. And I've been years since I've done that, but
boo.
Yeah, but we purchased a new shop. We added some new vehicles to our fleet. I mean, we made a huge investment in some capital last year that we calculated and made a decision to spend some of that profit and on paper we showed no profit. Now, I don't, and I've told my team, by the way, I run my company as an open book. Last Wednesday or 2 Wednesdays ago, we had a weekly or quarterly meeting with our entire team, showed them the P&L statement. And I showed them, what we had done year to date this year. And I showed them what we did last year. And I reminded them, we're going to make a profit this year because we don't want to go 2 years in a row without making a profit. That'd be foolish for us. It would, eat into our cash a little bit too much. And so I think when you're talking about the overhead number, it's really easy for it's just not comparable. So if I'm trying to help you as a company, I'm trying to use industry standards, it just gets really wonky in the overhead section, right? I know guys, I never spent more than $1,500 a month over the last 28 years. I've never spent more than $1,500 a month on shop rent. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, Dan. Real estate's expensive here. Like I'm not in, I don't know. I'm not going to even say. I'm not in a place where real estate's not expensive. It's expensive here, right?
You know who you are. If $1,500 doesn't sound like cheap, then you know who you are. You're in a great place.
But I've just been really careful with what I've rented. I've sacrificed. I haven't always enjoyed the places I've rented. I've been very careful to tell my team, I care about you, but I care more about our clients and I care more about the truck and things you're riding in as I do the place we're at for about 30 or 40 minutes a day. My staff works remote, so it helps a little bit there. Doesn't apply to every company, right? So if I were talking to another company, like, hey man, how can you do that? My rent's $5,000 a month.
Let's maybe start. Let's maybe start there. I know that this wasn't what our plan was, but let's maybe start on the overhead side.
Yeah.
So again, there are two big numbers that we're going to look at whenever we're looking at profit. Our first big number is cost of goods, and the second big number is our overhead expense. And if you're working with any bookkeeper worth their salt, they're going to divide it up that way to where you see those expenses come out of your P&L that way.
Let's remind you, cost of goods sold, labor, field labor, taxes for field labor, disposal cost, subcontractors, products for jobs, not shop supplies, but products that you use on jobs. Am I missing one?
Disposal cost,
those types of things. Coincidentally, fuel, we don't put fuel in the cost of goods sold. I see fuel in there sometimes. Best example I can give you is a reason why not to put it up there is it's really not something your team has control over. Yeah. Right? The cost of buying fuel is the cost of buying fuel. The price of fuel is the price of fuel. You want to put things in your cost of good that your team controls, right? Your team controls if it wastes products. Your team controls if it wastes hours, and so you can actually do some rewards on reducing COGs and give that back to your team. And we'll talk some about that as we go forward here. But COGS is that, and then everything else is overhead.
Every other expense is going to be overhead, with the exception of that aren't going to show up in overhead, with the exception of our debt service and our owner withdrawals. There might be a few other things, but we're not going to talk about those. So you have a philosophy about overhead, and the way that you approach it is the way I would recommend people think about overhead, which is we want to keep that number lower rather than higher. That sometimes, it's kind of like my wife is always looking at and judging the neighbors' cars, where you're like, can that family really afford a Tesla? Can that family really afford a whatever? And we're like trying to figure out how much they make, and we're judging them all, and it's really terrible. But at the end of the day, like, too often we're eating up our ego, might be eating up our profit. And I'm just going to be open about it, because I do think there's an advantage to the Jonathan Potoshnik, for those who know that name. He was running out of a really, who was it? Were you the one that was telling me that somebody was running out of like a storage facility?
Yeah, he ran out of a mini storage facility for years. It's a very unique property. I'd been to it before. It had some offices attached to it. It worked really well. It
wasn't fancy. It wasn't a showroom. It wasn't.
Man, I remember when I went and did a roundtable with him in 2012, he took us to the facility. Service Autopilot had their building, and we did the conference there. It was a nice place, or the roundtable at his conference room there. But then he took us out to the City Turf facility on Sunday afternoon, and I remember looking at the offices and going, these are a little below average. And I remember looking at the trucks; they were all used trucks that have been repurposed. They were all paid for. And then each mow crew had a little locker, like they were the door style lockers. They weren't the roll up doors. There were some roll up doors for bigger things and materials and things, but each mowing crew had a little locker almost like, and it was really cool. If you've ever run a lawn care company, you know that people like to take things from each crew. So if you have multiple crews, things will get missing, and they're like they're like our kids, right? Our kids steal clothes and
but the
shoes.
Principle is it was simple, functional, like designed to be efficient and easy for people to use. It wasn't that they were making it hard on their employees, but they were also recognizing your staff's at that office a total of 40 minutes a day. If it
should
most,
be,
right?
Your mowing crew should be at your office 30 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon. Yep. Unless you've got a major repair, and then in that case, that everyone shouldn't be there. It should be somebody making a repair. The other thing is, what was he focused on? And I remember that. Yeah. He was focused on marketing his company. He was focused on having cash to pay cash for equipment and things like that. And so, and I can tell you, at the time that was going on for him, he could afford to pay for those things. And so, and for me, only spending $1,500 a month in rent. By the way, I didn't own a building until 28 years in business. And I know Dave Ramsey's a big fan of it. Renters don't go to hell, right? Renting isn't foolish.
Yeah.
Being a slave to the lender and being under this weight of a building and a mortgage, it can be very debilitating. I'll tell you this, I'm thankful I waited as long as I did, because we nailed down our business model, in year 2022, of our business, not 2022, but in the 22nd year of owning our company, we really established who we were, and we knew for a fact who we were. And so the building that we're in today is perfect for the company that we landed on. 10 years ago, that would not have been the perfect building for our company.
That's interesting, right? Is it took time for you to figure out who you were, what you wanted, what you needed. And so in the meantime, you rented until you did figure that out.
I wish I'd have had the lawn care CEO. Maybe they could have helped me sooner.
So here's an exercise. So we won't spend too much time here, because like Aaron mentioned, it's going to vary dramatically based on your region, your locale, your tastes, your whatever. But here's an exercise that's worth doing. Take 35% of your revenue and imagine that was your budget you had to spend on your overhead expense. So last year I made $600,000, I'm going to take 35% of that, which is $1,800 something dollars, $180 something thousand dollars. Somebody can do the math. And
what was the revenue again?
So 600,000, and you're taking 35%. You can do the math for me.
Yep. $210,000.
So you get $210,000 to spend. And then I want you to dole it out as if that's all you have to spend. And you had to prioritize expenses to say, okay, I've got to figure out how to live my life in $210,000. Now, if you're like me, in my personal finances, there's this little magical thing that happens, that my wife and I spend as much money as we make, as we allot. I should rephrase that. We spend as much money as we allot ourselves to spend. Mm-hmm. We never underspend. We always spend right up to that amount. And by the way, that's been true when I was a poor, unemployed school teacher, and it's true as the CEO of a company. We spend exactly up to the amount that we have allotted to spend. And so when you go give yourself a firm budget and you say, okay, this is all I have to spend, what it will do for you is it will make you prioritize things differently. And there are some things that will get cut out of the budget pretty quickly. You'll be like, all right, that trip to Barbados with those 4 guys that cost me 20 grand. Well, that's got to go, because I can't prioritize that ahead of paying my rent. Right. And so you're going to be able to narrow down what really matters in your expense line. And if you start at 35 and you go, okay, I could barely squeeze it in, but it might actually cost me 37, then we're going to be within an acceptable range, likely. But if we just spend whatever we feel like, and we don't put a cap on that, we don't put a limit on that, man, that, just like in my personal finance, that can really run away with me quick. And so in our family, we budget. We say, this is how much money we're going to make this year, and therefore we're going to choose to save this percent. We're going to now choose, this is going to be how much we're going to allot ourselves to spend. And you'll be shocked at how many things we can actually eliminate while still running a very effective business.
You used a very important word, Dan.
The B word.
The B word. Budget. Seriously, it first of all, QuickBooks Online, I think, is what probably the majority of our clients are on now. A few people still on the desktop version. I don't think they're supporting the desktop version after this year, but at any rate, QuickBooks Online has a really cool feature. It's free. It's easy. It's a budget feature. Dan, we use it at the Lawn Care CEO. We use it at RDS Lawn Care. You don't need to. Dan and I are not financial gurus. We're not accountants. We're not. This is just basic stuff, guys. When we were first married, we were pretty broke, and my wife's a school teacher, and I was on.
By the way, who wasn't pretty broke when they were first married?
Yeah. Tell me what you did if you weren't. But and I was, you were an unemployed school teacher. I was an unemployed business owner.
Yeah,
like I didn't take a check.
Self-unemployed is what we call that. So.
Yeah. We weren't making a lot of money then. And, we used the Dave Ramsey envelope system, man. I mean, we put our cash in envelopes, and, I had a friend of mine who's a really frugal guy, and he's a great dude, and, not in the industry at all. And he came from humble beginnings, and he said he remembers taking the groceries and having like a Monday box and a Tuesday box and a Wednesday box, and basically saying like, rationing the food, right? You need to ration your expenses. I told someone this last week, Dan, the next business I start, and we're kind of doing that here, I will actually starve the business a little bit. Even if I have the money to throw around, I think you starve the business. Even if you're sitting on a $500,000 investment that you can go and live a little differently, I would still starve a new business a little bit and let me kind of see where does it really need money and where does it not. Yeah. And so I think smart entrepreneurs who have cash know how to budget, and they hold their team accountable to the budget. And so there's a really cool feature. Once you build your budget, by the way, the best time to build your budget is at the end of the year. So you can take, and at the end of this year, I'll take all of 2024's numbers, and it'll just make a budget for me based on those numbers. And so if you don't want to dig in, just calculate, right? Account for what you spend. And if you have at least 1 year's worth of data, it'll make a budget for you. It's really cool. Go read about it on their help tools and all that. It's not hard, but
I do feel like I want to quote Dave Ramsey like 100 times as we're going through all of this, right? Like, what's Dave Ramsey's famous quote? It's like
live like no one else, so you can live like no one else.
Exactly that one.
Mm-hmm. Or if you live like no one else, one day you will live like no one else. Like you can, like, if you go spend a bunch of money today, you're going to be poor later.
And I promise you that extra cool tool that you didn't really need, but it was like a fun buy because, it circulated the opposite direction or whatever the function was that you were excited about. That cool tool, that probably is an expense and not an investment. That $8,000 you spent on that, it's going to be way more fun to have $8,000 in your pocket at the end of the year. And it's going to be way more. Yep.
The couple biggest expenses that I think are throwing people off as I'm thinking about this, as you're saying that. One is entrepreneurs love stuff. They love the equipment. Yep. They love, when I go visit a client, they love to show me all the things they have, right? And those are investments. If those investments are not making you money, sell them. That's just like stacking cash on the shelves of your shop. Yep. So if you've got a bunch of equipment, Dan, we actually have a list of equipment right now at our company that it's like $30,000. And it's just, I tell my team, it's like, we just have $30,000 sitting on a shelf in our shop. Like we have a really cool,
and then complaining that we don't have any money.
Right. And so, it happens in every business. We all buy things. We're like, oh, we really needed a Z sprayer at our company, and we don't need a Z sprayer. We use spreaders and pull hose, and we like it. And we have small yards, and a Z sprayer didn't work for us. So we have this $15,000 piece of equipment with 20 hours. If you're listening to this podcast, you're interested in Z sprayer, hit me up. I'm going to be selling one soon. But seriously, that's a really fancy, like, awesome thing that we thought might be needed. And when we bought it, it made sense, but now it doesn't. And so we need to sell it. It has less than 100 hours on it, right? It's just sitting there. So you have a list of things like that. The other thing is marketing. People are spending money and by the way, if you're not tracking your marketing, if you don't know where the money's being spent, if you're not going to sit down and go into detail and really track your marketing, go to Vegas and put it all on black and spin the roulette wheel one time. It's about the same because you don't know. If you don't know what's working, it's a gamble, and stop gambling with your money. Okay. Yeah. Don't buy equipment that you don't need. I see, especially if you're in the construction side of the business, Rent your equipment, guys. Build it into your job. Rent your equipment. If you can't run that machine, 200 days a year, probably need to rent it. And so
the principle,
and then the last one is this. Hang on. So the other one is, you guys spend a ton of money on consulting, and I'm happy that I'm in a business where I get some of those dollars. But listen, sometimes you guys are chasing too much knowledge. You need to do the knowledge. You need to implement the knowledge you've already learned. Going to every conference and traveling all over the country and being a part of every peer group known to man. Listen, get in a good peer group. If you're not doing any of that, do some of that. But I see some of you guys never say no to a trip, and you're in debt.
Yeah.
You're on the verge of bankruptcy, and you're going to an awesome conference somewhere. Listen, you need to stop. I'll give you a great example. There was a group that I wanted to be a part of so bad. I wanted to be a part of the SA Academy. I couldn't afford it. I needed to market my company. I knew what I needed to do. I had done some things. I went and implemented. And I missed out on some awesome relationships, and some great people were in there, but I needed to go do what I had learned. And that's what I did. And it was a wonderful option for me. So I'm not saying don't do some of this. I'm not trying to take money out of our plate, right? But at the same time,
whatever you do, don't hire a coach, whatever.
Yeah. Well, listen, Dan, there's people who have hired 2 and 3 coaches at the same time.
But the principle is this, and the principle is ROI. It's return on investment, because we do, as business owners, need to spend. We do need to invest. Mm-hmm. We need to do it within these, because you just told us that you went and did a bunch of investing on a facility, on new trucks, and you sacrificed profit as a result of that.
Yep.
But you know that there's this tremendous ROI on that investment, and
it was calculated.
So that's a good bet. And a safe bet. And in the same way, when you look at, let's say we were saying, all right, I'm going to go to this conference. It's across the country. It's going to cost me $10,000 all in to get there and stay and spend money on food, et cetera. You got to ask yourself, am I getting more than 10K? If it's just 10K's worth of value, it's probably not a great spend, right? And is there something there that's happening that's giving me a great ROI? I know that when we coach someone, our personal kind of our internal goal, behind the curtain goal, is that we want to give a 10x return for any money spent on coaching with us. And that's kind of our target internally. And so, but we have to have ROI on our spend. That's principle 1. And then principle 2 is we also still have to stay within budget. We have to choose between good ROIs sometimes, so that we can not put too much financial strain on the business, that we don't eat up too much into our cash, so that we're not prepared for a rainy day, that we don't have a rainy day fund ready to roll when the bad times come. And so principle 1 is budget, and principle number 2 is ROI, and making sure that what we do spend on, we're getting that return on investment for it. So that's half of it, right? The half of it is this overhead percentage. And you can go through the exercise of saying, all right, 35% of what I'm going to make this year.
30 to 35% is where you should be. If your overhead is exceeding 35%, I would want your COGs to be in the 35 to 38% range, right? I certainly don't want to have COGs in the 40s, high 40s, and overhead in the high 40s. I mean, you don't have to be a math major to understand there's not going to be a lot of profit left there, right? And so if you have higher overhead, you better have lower COGs. If you have, higher COGs, you probably need to have lower overhead. And so that brings us to the real point here, Dan, that we need to talk about, which is the reality is, if you have high COGs, you probably need a lot of management to get those COGs down. And so you may be going, well, I need the management to manage this high COGs, right? Let's talk about what that looks like. So if your COGs are high, right? Remember, cost of goods sold, you probably have a really high labor number in there. By the way, Dan, we have seen 2 companies, you and I both, independently, that their COGs as a percentage of revenue was over 60% through June of this year, right? Or through May of this year.
Yeah.
right? Because we don't know what June's going to be yet. So 60% COGS, I can tell you right now, that business has a very difficult chance of growing, adding good team people, team members, being profitable, being a business that would want to be purchased. Like, no chance of 60% COGS. And so there's two ways you can reduce COGS in a business, and that is, there's two ways you can reduce labor. That is either through extreme management of your team's time, right?
Because our labor, we're going to price it correctly so that if we hit our budgeted hours,
Yep.
if we're doing hourly, we hit our budgeted hours, that we're going to hit the number we need to, and we're going to be priced correctly, and our cost of goods will be correct.
And so we talked about this in part one. Life is not lived on paper, and this is what we're talking about in part two is that life. And so Dan and I, we coach these companies. We build these awesome rate matrix. They go put them in their system, and they think their work is stopped. They think they're done. Like, oh, let's just go sell work and get work done. And the reality is the work's just beginning. Because if I tell you, Dan, that I'm going to mow a lawn for $75 and I'm going to have 1 man hour for that, then essentially, right, my man hour rate is $75 an hour, right? Pretty simple math for me. We got to keep it that way. All right. And so if I send two guys to that house, they can spend 30 minutes together there, right? Because there's two men going. We got to reduce that. We got to divide that by two, right? You have a CRM. It should do all that for you. If it doesn't, you should find one that does. So two guys go cut that lawn and we charge $75. Well, if we spend, and you told me that you have a company you're coaching where like they were routinely 50% more, spending 50% more time on average than what was budgeted. So
we started, they didn't really know that until we started measuring it. And then it was like, yeah, when we take our budgeted hours and we divide our actual hours by our budgeted hours, it's 150%.
So the first thing you should do is, if you're not tracking your time that your team is spending on the properties you're currently maintaining, then you should start that right now. And here's the reality. You are committing to morning and afternoon, someone on your team being there to meet with each team and say, team one, mowing team one, you had, 16 budgeted man hours. This is a 2-man crew, let's just say. And you guys just spent, 9 hours doing 8 hours or 16 hours, right? Y'all are out for 9 hours. And so therefore, you spent 18 hours doing 16 hours of work. Not a bad deal, right? Because you got to allow for drive time and things like that, right? But someone's got to be tracking this. You got to meet with that team before they go and share with them what the expectation is. And you got to meet with them at the end of it to say, good job or bad job, right? The reality is this. If you're not willing to do that, if you don't measure this stuff, it's not going to be respected by your team. People respect what we inspect. And so if you as an owner or a manager, or you don't have someone on your team who is constantly reminding the team of what the expectation is through some sort of, data to the team, you have no chance of controlling the cost of goods sold. Because remember, the team is actually working counter to the way you're trying to work, right? You're trying to be efficient and get things done. How are we paying these teams, Dan?
Yeah, by how many hours they work. Yeah, and this is the funny part about the hourly game. And I'm not mad at hourly labor. I am. I'm not mad at it.
Yeah.
But what I am mad at is when it doesn't work for the business, which is pretty common. And so but at the end of the day, right? What we incentivize generally is what will happen. And so if you're in an hourly labor situation, are you incentivized as an employee to do more or less, to work faster or slower?
Slower.
You're incentivized to go slow. And and we don't want to be like, crazy slave drivers where the whip is always cracking, but we need to be efficient. And more importantly, we need to understand how long something's actually going to take if somebody's moving fast. But you essentially have a gravitational pull towards slow in the hourly game. Meaning if all things remain equal, we'll get slower and slower because we're incentivized by slow rather than fast.
Yeah. And it just ultimately, it doesn't even matter to us, right? Which is worse, right? Like it's not even that no one really wants to work longer, because even hourly workers, they don't really like working 40, 45 hours a week, but they just don't care. It doesn't matter to them if your company does this work faster or not, because it's not reflected in anything that you do for them, in your paycheck. It's not reflected. And the only chance you have, if you're going to continue to pay hourly, is to inspect it. And then it's almost kind of militant at that point, right? It's like
a high level of management, because the way we push back against the gravitational pull of hourly slowing, the incentive that's pulling you that direction, is we have to manage it really effectively, really consistently. We have to really on top of it. We have to build great culture. We have to get people committed to the cause. We have to do all of those things to prop up that kind of negative incentive. And it can happen. I've seen it happen where we have good employees working hourly. They work hard, they're efficient. It does happen, but only in the condition of really great management. And it certainly is something that we'll have to always constantly manage, because the incentive is pulling us in a direction that's contrary to what we actually want. And so if you feel like you have to constantly be pushing the teams to do it, well, it makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, we aren't very motivated to go faster. We're motivated to go a little slower.
And it's funny too, Dan. I think in the industry, it's the lowest margin services that require the most management.
Yeah, interesting. And by the way, don't be mad at these guys. Don't be mad. They're not. Oh. It's not them. It's not like you can only be mad at them if you never tried to do as little work in school and get the best result. You can be mad at them then if you always did this maximum amount of work for the A. It's like, no, we all kind of like will trend towards. It's a human condition. We'll trend towards doing as little as possible for the result, the desired outcome. It's part of our makeup.
I think that's a brilliant thing. We should all be trying to do that. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's the nature of,
like, that's the whole point
success.
Of our podcast, is to teach our CEOs how to do as little as possible and get the best result. Mm-hmm. Right. And so don't get me mad at them. And so, we've talked about the alternative on this podcast before. Mm-hmm. We'll continue to talk about the alternative moving forward, which is to find some way to make the motivation production based rather than hourly based. Because if I'm paid by how much I produce, then all of a sudden my motivation is to be more efficient and faster. And the incentive, the natural flow is towards higher production and higher speed.
At the very least, if you were going to measure this and you're going to micromanage, right, every morning, every afternoon, I'm going to meet with my team. I'm going to share the data, right? I'm going to pull these awesome reports that tell me, hey, look, because listen, guys, you can have a great report. If you don't do anything with it, it's not going to matter to the team, right? You seeing the numbers is not important. The team needs to see the numbers. But if you're going to do that and you don't share with them, in reducing the COGs. So let's say that your COGs right now are at 60%. And, the goal is we have to get them to 48% or 50%, whatever, going from 60 to 50 might be a good goal, right? Well, listen, I'm going to give a 10% of the difference of that, right? So let's say that, reducing COGs from 60 to 50% makes an extra $100,000. Well, I'm going to take $10,000. I'm going to make that a bonus. And I'm going to split that between the crews that were the most efficient. Okay, that's one thing you could do. If you're not going to give them something for doing it faster, put yourself in their position. Why are you going to care? Because listen, guys, remember, back to kind of purpose and values. Like, the purpose of your company can't be to make you rich. Like, that's not a purpose anybody on your team gets behind. And they don't care if your cost of goods is 60%. Guess why? It doesn't matter to them. Doesn't impact their family.
Nothing to incentivize them to care about that.
And so if you're going to stick with hourly, you better find a way to bonus them off of reducing your cost of goods sold. The other alternative is what we talked about earlier, which is P for P, pay for performance. Some type of pay for performance pay system is going to give them, it's going to put them in the same position you're in as an owner, right? If you're out there today and you're still doing a little work in the field, or you can remember the time when you worked in the field, just ask yourself, why is the owner of the company were you so much faster than your hourly employees? It's because you didn't get paid any extra to take twice as long. You didn't get paid a dime more. You got paid what you're getting paid, and you had all the incentive to go and do the work more efficiently. And getting them on a pay for performance system is the answer to solving this.
And it's funny when you get to that point where you are doing P for P. So we were obviously work with a lot of companies that do some form of pay for performance, where the gravitational pull in hourly is to go slower. The gravitational pull in pay for performance or performance-based pay is to go faster. And so it's like upside down world where you're having to say, all right, guys, slow down. Like the management is like, hey, slow down a little. Like you have to stay on property at least 10 minutes or else we don't count it, right? Like which is a much easier management dilemma to say, hey, we need you to slow down, because that's the nature of us to be a little more lazy than not lazy, than the opposite management dilemma, which is speed up. So if we can get them in a slow down dilemma as a manager, that's much easier than a speed up dilemma.
Yeah. And then, what you may have is what I had at our company just about a month ago, and he worked Saturday. I've got an employee who said, hey, I'd like to make a little extra money. Do you mind if I take a route on Saturdays? And our general manager came to me and said, what do you think? And I was like, I think it's awesome. And he said his logic was, well, I was going to like Uber or DoorDash or something like that. And I thought, well, I'll make more money doing another route. Would you give me a Saturday route occasionally? And so we agreed, as long as it didn't impact his, production during the week or didn't get burnt out, those types of things. We're like, great. I mean, be honest with yourself. If you're listening to this, I can tell you, I can be honest with you. I've never had an hourly employee say, could I work Saturday to get a few more hours? I mean, it it just changes.
There are probably some out there that do.
Yeah.
But again, there is this kind of spirit of, hey, I want to do more. I want to do more. And you feel that wind in your sails as an owner, because that's how you feel about it too, right? That you're on the same side of the table. We won't talk too much more about it, but the spirit of what we're doing when we're trying to do a performance-based pay is we're essentially locking in the labor rate. So if I'm doing mowing and I'm spending, and I'm say, hey, I'm going to give you 30% of whatever you mow. If we bring in $100, I give you $30. You divide it two ways, and you make $15 each on that mowing job. And what that does is it locks in the cost of goods to where it's consistent through the year. And that now allows us to feel confident about our profitability, because now I know that I can get my cost of goods to a certain percentage. I know my gross margin, my gross profit's going to be in an acceptable range. If I've got my overhead budgeted, I'm following my overhead budget. Well, now I know I'm going to be at that 20, 25, 30% profit, or that hopefully we're pushing that direction, so that after we pay our debt service, we pay our owner payout, like that we're in a good, healthy profit position, that 15, 18, 19% that's left in the bank at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And
the first step in this, guys, understand your P&L statement and get a budget. I mean, honestly, if you can't tell me, and I've been to clients before where I couldn't figure out what their cost of goods as a percentage of labor was. It was really hard to advise that company. So get your numbers clean. Get a bookkeeper. Get with your CPA.
If you need a good bookkeeping recommendation, just shoot us a quick email. info@ceocoach.biz. info@ceocoach.biz. Just shoot us a quick email, or go to our website and you can contact us that way. And the reason I bring that up is just that, sometimes it might be hard to know who to reach out to or how to find that good bookkeeper, who can help me get my books cleaned up if I've been kind of messy with them up to this point. Let us know. We're happy to make a recommendation there. And we have a couple that we recommend that are really solid and we have a lot of faith in. So, but that's going to be fundamental. You can't be a CEO without knowing your numbers.
Yep.
You just can't.
Step 2 is you need to understand what percentage should your COGs be as a percentage of your revenue. And so I'm going to tell you that real quick. If you are a full-scale lawn and landscape company, let's say you're like, man, I do lawn mowing, I do lawn fertilization, I do cleanup work, I mulch, I trim shrubs, I do some small little projects, then your cost of goods as a percentage is going to be 45% to 48%, somewhere in that range, okay? So, it's a real simple number. All the things that we told you were in the cost of goods sold divided by your revenue. That's going to tell you what percent that was, okay? If you're using QuickBooks Online and you're getting it updated regularly, by the way, if you're not closing your books out at the end of the month, right? So June's about to end here pretty soon. By July 10th, I want to know that my numbers are clean for June. Therefore, my numbers are clean for the second quarter and the first quarter and the first half of the year. I will be looking at those numbers. June's a big month for me to look at. I mean, the first couple weeks of July, it's a huge moment for me as a landscape business owner. I'm looking back.
It's the halftime score, right?
Yeah. What do we got to do to catch up? Or what do we got to do to maintain this lead we have, right? And so 45 to 48%. If you're a full-scale company, you should be in that range. If you're lower than that and you're a full-scale company, congratulations. You've done awesome. Okay. Now, let's say you're just a mowing company. You don't do anything but mow. I don't touch anything else. Then your COGs could be in the 30% range. Matter of fact, they better be close to 33%. You should not be spending, and we need to talk about this. Let's actually talk about the labor. I don't think there's any one service in your service makeup that should get more than 33% to labor. Okay. And so if you were just a mowing only company, I'm just mowing lawns, and your cost of goods sold is higher than 33%, then your labor is higher than 33%. You're probably paying too much for labor. And so the best way for a mowing company to reward and pay really these guys that get out there and hump it and really do great work is to pay them on performance. They're going to eat that up. But 33% is where you should be if you're just a mowing company, right? If you're doing mowing and some other services, cleanup, shrub trimming, mulching, then you're probably closer to the 40-45% range. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So,
and obviously this is going to, some of you are thinking you're an exception to the rule here. If you think you're an exception to the rule, feel free to reach out to us and we'll tell you why you're not. I'm kidding. Yeah. No, because there might be some uniquenesses here. And if there are some unique circumstances or situations, I could be open to that, but we want to dig in and we want to really understand. These are general rules, not specific ones to you, but it gives you hopefully a gauge to say, man, if I'm at 58 and I'm supposed to be at 45 or 47, there's probably a problem.
I've priced the work wrong, or I'm not managing the time I've allowed for my guys to complete the work.
Exactly.
It's one of the two. Now, if you are one of these companies that's sort of a niche company, lawn fertilization and weed control only, or maybe you're landscape lighting only. We see quite a few of those. You're an irrigation repair company and you just I know a great company that just does a lot of irrigation repair work. Your COGs should be below 35% as a rule of thumb. I've seen some in the low 30s. If you're pricing really aggressively and you're getting it, then you're probably in the low 30s. If you're pricing to grow your company a little bit more, you could be over 35%. You should definitely be below 40%, shooting for 35% as an average. If you're not growing and your COGs are in the low 30%, you're probably priced too high, right? If you've gone through a couple seasons, you're like, man, I'm not closing business. You might want to look at your cost of goods and you might want to push that up a little bit to 35%, 35% or maybe a little higher. Here's the reality. Anything below 40% is going to be awesome at scale. you're going to have a great company at scale.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of money left over to do some things that you want to do. So don't get greedy and have 100 clients and be the most expensive person by a long shot. It's going to be hard to scale. So 35% lighting, irrigation, fertilization, weed control, those industries, those specific niche services should be in that range.
You'll notice those are the higher profit chunks of business, right? And the reason is lower cost of goods.
They spend less to produce it. And then as a rule of thumb, if your overhead is above 35%, you probably need to question, like, why? Like, what are we doing? What did we overbuy on a shop? Or, maybe there's a important family member that you want to have in your team, and they don't really make sense right now. I mean, I've hired my son recently, and he's learning the business. He's not returning to me a profit right now.
Hiring your son is a bad investment.
It's an investment. It's not a bad investment. It only to be determined. If it's a bad investment. But obviously, right, I wouldn't probably have hired him or another person at his age at that time. And so that factors into my overhead, right? And so
the principle is, if the overhead is in that north of 35 or 4, like, it's time to do a little audit. It's time to really audit those expenses. And again, if we fixed our budget at 35, what would go first? And that's a pretty good sign of, a pretty good test to evaluate whether or not those things we want to include. And there will be times where just don't let we're in growth mode be the excuse for bad spending.
At some point, guys, you can't stay in growth mode forever. At some point, you got to take your foot off the gas, or you're going to run out of money. Unless you've got a rich uncle that's just funding you or going to continue to fund you. I mean, at some point, every company has to kind of do this and plateau a little bit, and then they can go to the next level, plateau, and then go to the next level. Just for fun here. This is the fun part, right? So, Dan, let's say we dream of someone coming and writing us a check for our business one day. Okay.
Yeah.
And so let's say we grow our company to $1.5 million. Okay. So $1.5 million company. That's a fair size company, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, private equity in our market, I talked to about 2 or 3 of these companies a good bit. And I will tell you, they're going to give you somewhere between 3.5% to 5% on what number, Dan? Net profit.
EBITDA.
Yeah, EBITDA. And so you got $1.5 million company. Let's say, Dan, that company for 3 years, by the way, they're not going to come pay you on 1 year's, projection or whatever, 1 year's worth of data. They're going to probably want to see like 3 years of consistent returns, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to audit the heck out of those numbers. So if you're you're not going to trick them. They're going to have people way smarter than all of us. So let's just say that $1.5 million company had a 20% return. So that's $300,000. Okay. And you're not very big at 1.5 million. Matter of fact, a lot of private equity companies are looking for like 5 million in revenue. But let's just say you're like a niche company that does like lighting or landscape landscape lighting, or irrigation, or fertilization, weed control. So 300,000, and they give you a 3 times EBITDA. Well, that company's worth $900,000 to private equity. Okay. So, guys, if you want a valuable company, by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, I just said 1.5 million, 20%, 300,000. If you're making $300,000 a year right now, congratulations. You're in the top like 2% of income earners in the country. You could probably feed your family pretty well off $300,000 a year. I could. So, but this gives you options, right? If you can get your company producing that kind of cash, when do you sell it? Well, you got options, right? But, so let's say you got a $5 million company at 15% net profit, and this has been happening for years, and they give you 4% EBITDA.
4x.
Yeah. Nope, I did the math wrong. Sorry. 5 million, 15%, 750. That's four. So they would buy your company for $3 million. Now, I haven't heard a lot going over 5 times, and probably what they're going to do is they're going to dig into you, and they're going to find all these ways to price you down, and they're going to get you almost to the table and get you excited about it.
I'm not mad at $3 million though. Let's go.
No, but again, this is what you need to understand. If you're a lawn care CEO, you better understand this stuff.
Yeah.
It ain't about which blade you're putting on your mower. It's not about Skag or Toro. It's not about which ramp rack you got on the back of your truck. It's not about what spray tank you're using, or, it's not about how many gallons per minute you're spraying yards at, guys. I mean, those all matter, but that's like, you guys argue on Facebook groups all the time about those things. If you're trying to build a valuable company that can employ really good people, you better learn how to make a net profit. You better understand your overhead. You better understand your cost of goods sold. And so, we just wanted to, in this podcast.
FYI, do you know the number I like better than the $3 million that private equity is going to offer me?
What number do you like?
I like $750,000 a year for the rest of my life.
Sure.
That's the
Hey, Dan, I could take a couple 100,000 of that, 300,000 of that, and hire some studs to come in and run my marketing department. I could invest some real money into people, right? Yeah. Which come in and make that $5 million company $10 million, $20 million. Go watch Warren Buffett. That's what he does, right? They go and hire stud teams and companies that have figured out how to provide basic awesome services. Go look at the list of companies they own. You know what they own? They own Dairy Queen. They own See's Candy. They own some furniture places. They own they own Clayton Homes. They're the largest home builder in the country. By the way, you know what Clayton Homes is? These ain't multi-million-dollar homes. These are manufactured homes. Okay, they're in areas where they own Geico. They're in areas where everybody can buy what they offer, and they look for awesome teams, and they learn how to squeeze those the most out of those companies, right? And they do it. They're very culture driven too, Dan, which is pretty cool. So anyway, we just want you guys to understand what these numbers mean and why they're important, because they give you flexibility and they give you choices. And far too many times, Dan, I don't know about you, but I'm in with a company and I feel like we don't have a lot of choices, and that sucks.
Yeah,
and so
it's really fun when you do have those choices.
Yeah,
you guys, we want you to do more good in the world. We love you. We care about you. We hope that things are going well. If there's anything we can do to help, as always, you can find us at lawncareceo.com or info@ceocoach.biz. You guys, I'm going to mention one thing. We're participating in a couple of events coming up at the end of this middle of August. And if you're interested in participating in those events, they're actually free events. We have a sponsor in Harrell's who is sponsoring those events, and so they're paying everything except for your lodging. And so, killer events. Check out our website under the link events. You can find out more details, more information, where we are going to be talking in greater detail about pricing and cost of goods and how to really grow a profitable division, especially the turf and weed control division. I thought I'd mention that right at the end here because I want to offer you every opportunity to grow and learn. With that said, go do good in the world. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.